everybody. Here we are talking about the Tao Te Ching. The Tao of the Day is this program, and what I do is I come up and I ask you to pick a number between 1 and 81. Those numbers correlate with chapters or verses in the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is an ancient text written about 600 BCE, presumably by a guy Lao Tzu. And the whole history of our humanity, really, especially modern humanity, which is a logic-based sort of existence, it starts before the Tao, before we could write and all of that. The logic really started coming in because you wouldn't have writing if you didn't have logic. But one of the great things about the Tao and ancient texts like this, they point to a time before we relied on logic, before we relied on defining things, before things had too much meaning. Everything was a little bit more fluid, and we worked in a space that wasn't so structured. Now, structure's not bad. We need structure. But when we rely too much on structure, we lose touch with what everything is. We lose touch. So if we build a house and just keep building and building and building, well, eventually we won't have any space inside to actually do the living that we built the house for. Yes, it's a beautiful house and it's filled with all this stuff, but where's life going to happen? And life is the substance, right? Life is the thing that we want to be doing. And the structure should only expose the value of life. So substance can be exposed through structure. And what the Tao Te Ching really points at is this idea of don't forget the substance. Like that is the really big message behind the Tao Te Ching. In short, that's obviously not, that's a very shorthand, simple approach to understanding. Like, don't forget the substance. The Tao Te Ching looks back and says, society as it's moving is relying too much on structure, and we need to look at the substance that structure is there to expose. And so what I ask is that you come up on stage and we chat a little bit about what's going on in your life. And then I ask you to pick a number between 1 and 81. It's sort of like picking a, what are they called? Tarot card. So if you ever kind of had a friend that was a little on the esoteric side and they had tarot cards, and if you were ever going through something, they'd say, hey, pick a card from this deck. You pick it up, and then there's some insight there for you. It's very similar. The number that you pick will be attached to the information that you need to receive. Lisa's going to join me, and we're going to chat a little bit and pick a number. Hey, Lisa, how are you doing? Lisa? Okay, so Lisa Polite, I don't know if that's the way to pronounce your last name. I can hear you, but you're not speaking. So my guess is that this was maybe a mistake. And so I'll go ahead and move on to J. Nikki S., who's in line, and we can chat a little bit with her, and we'll see where we go. Hey, Jay.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Do you prefer Jay or Nikki or?
Either or works.
All right, I like Jay, so I'm gonna go with that.
Okay.
So how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm just seeing what's going on in your life and what's going on like just in general.
As far as, I'm sorry, as far as picking a tarot card?
Oh, well, no, just in general, is anything happening in your life that is, or are you can be as esoteric or you can just say whatever.
Oh, okay. Um,
Or we could just go right into picking a number between 1 and 81.
let's do that.
Yeah,
7.
7. Okay, so this is the Tao Te Ching. Have you heard this show before, or are you familiar with the Tao?
I just read a little bit about it in a book recently, but no, I'm not very familiar with it.
Okay, well, ancient text, 81 chapters. You pick number 7. Title of that chapter, The Wisdom of Not Having Preference. And it reads, it's very short, just like 8 lines. Tao is infinite. It doesn't grow old or tired. Because it has no preference for itself, it can always persist. The master puts herself last and always finds herself first. By being detached from preference, she can give herself to what is and find fulfillment there. Does that speak to you in any way?
Mm, yeah, I suppose it does.
Mm-hmm. Are there any lines or words that pop out at you directly, like stronger than others?
Um, Preference, I guess the part about not having a preference.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't fully understand that.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go through this a little bit more, line by line. Like not having a preference in this case is, and this is what it starts with in the beginning. Like Tao, okay, Tao, like that which everything is, and that which is within all things, right, is infinite, touches everything. So,
Hmm.
like the first section of this just talks about Tao, and it says it doesn't grow old or tired. Because it has no preference for itself, it can always persist. Now, what it's saying there is like, because it isn't the one expending energy trying to alter things, because it's not trying to convince you to be something that you're not, because it's not asking you to be, every time we have a preference, we expend this energy in trying to get something, right? Desire, wants, we want we want to be somewhere else, we want to do something.
Oh,
That's preference. Every time we have a preference, what we're doing is we're robbing ourselves of this moment and energy that we could otherwise be like engaging. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah. And so now it talks about the master, and in the Tao, the person who follows Tao and the person who is aligned with Tao and tries to live their life in that way. Now this isn't we can't help from doing that because we are in we're in flow with Tao always, even if we're not aware of it. However, there is like resistance and surrender, right? Like resistance is preference, surrender is like, well, I'm here. And so it says the master puts herself last,
Oh, sorry.
but always finds herself first. By
Hmm.
being detached from preference, she can give herself to what is and find fulfillment there. Does
That
that
makes sense.
say? Yeah. And does that resonate with anything going on with you right now?
Sure.
Yeah. So this is sort of what this show, like Tao of the Day, does. It's just sort of like, hey, and that's why when I was like earlier, just like, hey, what's going on with you? And it's like, you know, like as soon as you start thinking about like what's going on with you,
Hmm.
you're already aligned with finding the message that you need to hear, and that's why I ask it. And then when you pick a number, you're aligned with what needs to be, what you need to hear.
What do you think the difference is then between a synchronicity and people who experience like schizophrenia, like extreme pattern recognition?
So we have to recognize that schizophrenia is a diagnosis. It's a structure that we can put people in because they are, quote unquote, not normal. Now, and I don't know exactly pattern recognition that you're I do understand that as it relates to like you see a thing, right, everywhere. Um, and you can align what you're seeing with what, and everybody does that already. However, when things are when that becomes excessive, we have a diagnosis for that. Those individuals, and that you may fall into that category, have to. Well, I don't know what they have to do, but this is like the idea of preference goes into medication. Like I have a preference to not feel this way, and society has a preference for me to not be this way. And so there's always checks and balances in place in our society right now. We are very much under the influence of this idea of normal, and we don't allow people to explore themselves. And I think, I know a number of people with schizophrenia that don't take medication and are, and work really hard with they have a diagnosis of it, at least. I don't want to put any labels that they have something
It
on
seems
that.
like it seems like sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
it seems
please.
like maybe you're not that familiar with schizophrenia.
Well, like I said, I only have friends with schizophrenia. I
Oh,
don't
okay.
familiar with it in terms of I'm not a doctor.
Ah, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, no. So, I'm familiar with the Tao, and
Okay.
as
Okay. Okay.
this chapter relates to preference and my understanding of how schizophrenia as a diagnosis in a society with a lot of preference, and then individuals being under the influence of that society and having a preference to be like others because society forces that on them. That's the approach that I take. Whether or not an individual is how an individual wants to receive their experience of their life, not their diagnosis. Their diagnosis is coming from somewhere else.
Hmm.
The experience of having something is not diagnosis. Diagnosis is the experience of others being able to understand, or you having, or the individual getting a diagnosis. It's their way of understanding how they relate to others.
Like
Um,
categorizing.
Right. And so that again lays into preference,
Right.
right? And not having a preference to have or not have a diagnosis or to experience one thing or another. That's where energy in one's life can help grow old and tired, as it expressed in the beginning.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and Tao is infinite, right? So infinite meaning it is both. It is both. It both has and does not have the diagnosis of schizophrenia because it's part and parcel to all things.
Right. Which I mean, I guess that's kind of what people that have schizophrenia, or that's kind of their actual, it's like logical
Experience.
brilliance.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But when you fall outside of the confines of what people deem as normal, you gain all of these definitions and labels and categories and all of these things, and that sends you that forces you to feel separate.
Right.
But we're not.
That makes sense.
Jay, I have a issue with my timer. You only have 2 seconds left. If you want to come back up and chat, I would love to have you back up, and we can continue chatting about this. If you have any questions or other things, I really enjoyed your question. Of course, like I said, not a doctor. I do focus on the Tao, and as we look at the Tao, as we look at this verse, which I'll read again, Tao is infinite. It doesn't grow old or tired because it has no preference for itself. It can always persist. The master puts herself last and always finds herself first. By being detached from preference, she can give herself to what is and find fulfillment there. See, and I don't want to speak too much on schizophrenia because ultimately I don't have it. So, I mean, I have MS. I can speak to that. Or I have a diagnosis of MS, right? But so many of these things, right? It's like we have preference. We have preference to be normal. We have preference to be one thing or another thing, or we have preference. And then, but Tao is infinite and it doesn't have preference. So it doesn't try to embrace getting a diagnosis or having a diagnosis or trying to be labeled or categorized. I hope that was helpful. What I like to do, Jay, and anybody who's listening, is at the end of this, if I have a moment, and I don't think I will as soon as I'm done today, but hopefully by the end of the day or maybe tomorrow, I'll be able to send you the text via the chat here on Noomfi. So that, for those of you who are listening, that is a Tao of the Day session, or however we want to express what these are. It's the Tao of the Day talk. What I do is I just ask you a little bit about yourself, just real briefly, and then then I ask you to pick a number between 1 and 81. Preference in this number 7 that Jay selected, preference is sort of a big deal, because as soon as we have a preference for something to be different, we start expending energy trying to change what is. Like if we have a preference to have a sunny day over a rainy day, that carries with us. And even though we've had 7 sunny days, right, in a row, and then it rains, it's like, oh, it's raining. Why? Because somewhere inside of me, I have preference, right? And society has preference, and our neighbors have preference, and those sorts of things can weigh on us. Because and that's when, for those of you who don't know me, I got 23 years plus clean and sober, and I talk a lot in my work about living under the influence of society, living under the influence of marketing. We're born, we live under the influence of our parents. We can live under the influence of doctors. We can live under the influence of the education system. And all of those things can move us into having preferences. And sometimes there are even preferences we don't want, even preferences we don't have. Like we don't have a preference for one thing or another, but we create one because others do. I remember trying to do that when I was a kid. Like, oh, I wanted to, I remember I went to like a comic book convention thing, years and years and years ago, before, anything like Comic-Con was like, I mean, maybe they existed. Maybe that's what I went to. I don't know, because I wasn't into comic books. I mean, I was in grade school or early high school or something, and I didn't care about comic books, but I tried to have a preference. And then I bought comic books, and when I got them home, I looked through them and they were full of ads, and I was just like, this can't be what a comic book is. I must not know what this is, because I don't understand why anybody would want to collect these. It was not a preference, but I tried. I tried to have a preference, and I realized I didn't care. I didn't care about those things. So many things we will move ourselves into a position of having a preference. And I feel like many people have adopted preferences of others and continue to live their lives with preferences that they don't even carry. I mean, even with music for years and years and years, I mean, I engaged with, you know, odd, like music and other things like that. And I personally never really cared too much. So I only knew enough, and I mean, I did like punk rock music, and I did like certain kinds of hip hop back then, and like lots of different kinds of music, and I liked it, but I had no interest in doing any research and knowing who was behind it and reading but a lot of the friends that I had did, and so I would try to keep up. But that always was energy for me. I had a preference to be liked, or I had a preference to be a part of this group. And as this number 7 was it Jay selected, Tao is infinite. It doesn't grow old or tired because it has no preference for itself. It can always persist. If I didn't have a preference, then I would just be able to be. And I would just be able to move about my life as it flowed. And I can do that more today because I've relieved myself of all of this preference. Not all of it, of course, but a lot of it. Because I don't have to pretend to like music anymore. I don't have to pretend to like comic books. I don't have to pretend to want to, use all of my time to gain money that I can't do anything with. Like it's not. It's like to not have preference, to not care, and to just be here and be like, this is my life. This is who I am, and that's it. This is the master always puts herself last, but always finds herself first. As this number 7 continues, like you're not the important one. You're going to find happiness everywhere. Everybody else that has a preference, let them have a preference. You want to go to the front of the line, go to the front of the line. I'll just be here and wait. Why? Because that's what my life is right now. And I can find fulfillment here, as it says in the end, by being detached from preference. She can give herself to what is and find fulfillment there. You don't know what life is going to bring while you're in while you're next in line instead of being the one that's up. Who knows why the world is laying itself out this way for you? But wherever you are right now, that's where you are. Now, can you see this as the lesson for you? Now, is there something in you that says, no, I don't want to let you in front? Okay, don't let someone get in front of you. That's where you are right now. You are somewhere that you are angry or frustrated, or you feel something in your body and you're like, nope, I'm going to do what needs to be done in this moment. Whether that's take action or live under the influence of another person or idea for a time, but you're always ebbing and flowing, and that's who you are. And there is wisdom in not having a preference. That doesn't say don't ever have a preference. There's a dark side to everything. I've lived my life and I've tried to not have preference everywhere, but I also realized that not having a preference, sometimes the shadow of not having a preference turns up, and that looks like thinking that I don't have enough value to have a preference. So I won't want to ask people to do things for me because, well, I don't want them living under the influence of me. Well, that then has to be dealt with. This is why I say there's never a way for us to be too aware. Being aware that you are in relation to other things, being aware that things are ebbing and flowing and changing, that's the best thing. Like the wisdom of not having a preference, even not having a preference of having a preference. So if you have a preference at this moment, great, be here. Allow yourself to have that preference. And if something starts to resist that preference, what do you do now? What is the next most obvious thing for you? Do you surrender to that resisting? Or do you offer that external resisting force? And and if it's too much, lay down. Say, okay. Because you don't have to have a preference. You can, but there is wisdom in not having a preference. That doesn't mean never have a preference. Just recognize that there is wisdom in not having a preference. And that's going to often save you a lot of energy. The first thing it says about Tao is it doesn't grow old or tired. Do you want to not grow old or tired? Right? We all would like to not grow old and tired. And the thing that steals our energy so much is preference, is trying to be somewhere we are currently not, trying to have something we currently don't, trying to please someone we currently don't, trying to engage in these ways. So this number 7, and Jay had mentioned earlier that when she picked this number, she was talking about schizophrenia and other things like that. And we have to recognize that there was a time that these diagnoses didn't exist, and people were. Now, in any recorded history, we have been categorizing, because before writing, we didn't have the structures. Writing actually brought in all of the structures and categorizing, because we had to remember and define and do writing is the first structural thing that we do. So any recorded history is only recording one type of history, and that's structural history, and that's categorizing, and even, and this is why, for those of you who are new to the Tao Te Ching, the first verse of the Tao says words cannot express what Tao is. So if you are trying to understand Tao from a space of linguistics, from a space of vocabulary, it's going to escape you, because words cannot express Tao. So when we start talking about wisdom of not having a preference, that's not saying the only wisdom is not having a preference, but there is wisdom in it. If you can give yourself to what is more often, you will be able to conserve your energy and not age and not grow old or tired. And I do think that stress, which often is because we have a preference, right? We have a preference, and so we stress. This isn't the way we want it. This might not be what we desire. It's those are all preferences. So very often, not having a preference can just preserve that stress. Just oh, I might be going to jail. Well, okay, there it is. Like your actions have obviously led to this, or not, right? And if not, then and I'm not saying that innocent people going to jail is okay or anything like that, but this is your life. No matter where you're living it, it's yours. I mean, I've met so many people that have come out of prison and have just been such a light in the world in so many ways. And they would say, and they have said, that it was really a great thing for them. And now, one of my friends who I interviewed for my recovery podcast entitled Recover Yourself, talked about being in the hole for over 3 months, being solitary confinement, nobody there. And it was torture for him then. And now he's going on retreats, silent retreats and other things like that, where he is isolated and stuff, and he can be with himself. It's he looks for that which was torture once, because he had preference. And he had preference. And he also had demons, right? He had demons within himself that he had to exercise over time. Preference preference is going to guide us to who we are, but it's also going to keep us from receiving that which we are, which is all around us. And so Jay's choice of number 7 really talks deeply about preference, and it doesn't even say much, right? Tao is infinite. It doesn't grow old or tired. Because it has no preference for itself, it can always persist. No matter what it is, it can always persist. We can play the what if game always. But this right now is what actually is. Your mind creates things that aren't. I don't know how to properly say that because again, words are insufficient. But because it has no preference for itself, it can always persist. So no matter it doesn't have to be an identity. It doesn't have to be Tao. It doesn't have to be seen in a certain way. It doesn't have to have a preference for what it is. You can say it's stupid. It can still persist, and it doesn't have to convince you otherwise. You can say it's wrong, and it doesn't have to convince you otherwise. You don't have to have a preference for someone else to agree with you. You can let them believe what they believe. You can let them be who they are. The master puts herself last and always finds herself first. The first line of the second section is all about this idea of like, hey, I don't have to be right. You can be right all you want. I don't have to be. And if you're wrong, I don't have to let you know that. I don't have to make it so you are right. If you are factually somehow wrong, you can still do that. There was an interview by Soft Underbelly on YouTube, Soft White Underbelly or something like that. And he interviewed a flat earther. And it was such a tender interview. And he really relinquished space so that the person he was interviewing felt both respected and cared for and held. And he talked about how, and it's beautiful. So, I mean, if you get an opportunity, I think it's called Soft White Underbelly. And, or Soft Underbelly, I'm not exactly sure. And he interviewed a flat earther. And he interviews many people that are kind of dismissed by society. It's a nice series. But this one interview is really tender. And we can all kind of, understand from the perspective of like, especially if you aren't a flat earther, like, oh, well, that's crazy, right? Like, blah. I personally believe in everything because if I have a preference, then I'm already growing old and tired. So whatever, flat earther, great, move on. I don't have to prove you're wrong. I don't have to do anything. But this interview that he did was really brilliant because he talked about his childhood, and he found that the man that he was interviewing distrusted authority, and so like by the end, you're like, of course he believes this, of course, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with him believing that. He's living his life. He's good, He's gonna go about his life like anybody else, and you can love him from that perspective. You can allow him that space because you don't have to have a preference. You don't have to make him believe you. You don't have to stop him from believing something. If you believe if you're Christian or Muslim or whatever, you don't have to get someone else to, you're not wrong because they have a belief that they're right about something. This is not having a preference. This is just like we were talking about with Jay earlier in schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is, in the eyes of the medical community, wrong. But it's not wrong. There's nothing wrong about it. And I had mentioned that I have friends who, one in particular, who doesn't use medication for his schizophrenia. And it's a lot of work for him. And a lot of people say, well, that's bad. Because that's wrong, right? Society says, the doctors say, but that's all created. And it's really important to take a step back and understand that we have created these preferences in society. We have created these preferences within our lives. And these preferences are often keeping us from being who we are. Because, oh, well, that's not supposed to happen. I mean, when I talk to clients and other things like that, it's often like, okay, well, I want you to make a list of things you're good at and things you're bad at. And then when we kind of go back on each of those things, we find out that you feel like you're good at these because at some point you got praised for doing them. And you feel like you're bad at things because you got embarrassed by doing them, or you got told you weren't good at them. It's not because you're actually not good at something or good at something. You don't have like, maybe you have a penchant to doing something. You're more excited to do something. But sometimes the excitement for doing it is really excitement about getting praise. And that's not really who you are. And that identity and that labeling and all that really comes from preference of being loved. Because my dad loved me more when I was quote unquote good, whether that means polite or good at sports or good at like whatever. And my mom loved me more when I was neat or whatever. Whatever the thing is, those always kind of fall back on, I have a preference to be loved externally because somewhere along the line I'm living under the influence. And again, as a child, we live under the influence of our parents, and we want our parents to be happy. We want our parents, we want everybody to get along or do whatever. And so we alter ourselves in order to do that. And then we have a preference for something. And we don't even know that preference exists. And if we don't know that preference exists, we get outside of ourselves. We start to look outside of ourselves for love. We start to look to other people to give it to us in specific ways. And then we have preferences. And when we don't get those preferences, we get sad. And we can get depressed. Because we're not finding that which, like I was hanging out with a friend yesterday and her mom, and I asked about my friend's sister. And her mom was there, and she was just like, oh, it's my fault because I didn't have time. I didn't do some things. Like, the mother is seeing where her actions have turned into her adult child's trauma, right? And she's like, oh, it's my fault. Now, she's like, she's an adult. She has to deal with it on her own. There's nothing I can do to go back. Right, exactly. And it was her job to do those things for her daughter. And her daughter having a preference, and she's changing jobs all the time. Like, we hang out regularly, and we hadn't hung out in a month. And in a month, she was at a job, left it, started a new job, and is already sick of it. And it's like, whoop, all that in 1 month. And it was, it's this whole thing of preference. She wants to be seen in a certain way. She wanted her mom to see her in a certain way. She probably got praised at some point, and that praise stopped, and now she's seeking it because she has preference. And that preference can really eat away at who we are. And that's difficult. The master, going back to this number 7 that Jay selected, the master puts herself last and always finds herself first. You're not always going to find yourself first in every instance, at every moment. You put yourself last, and then the moment you start looking around and really taking in where you're at, which you're not going to do all the time. You shouldn't always be measuring yourself and where you're at. But those moments that you do, you're going to find you're doing just fine. You're going to find yourself first. You're going to find that by not trying to get to the front of the line, you're going to end up there. And that's what not having a preference is. You're sitting in line at the DMV and you're looking at the numbers and you're looking at the line and you're saying it's long, and you're like, all of a sudden you have to recognize all of the preferences that are going into that. The preference of getting out of there, the preference of getting it done or having someone else do it, the preference of like wanting the line to be short, the preference of all of the things that, you put in line, and you try and put yourself in that position. By being detached from preference, she can give herself to what is and find fulfillment there. I was in line recently. I got back from Spain 2 days ago, and I was in line of customs. My niece was a number of, she was behind me quite a bit because we were going to meet. We didn't travel together, but we were going to meet on the other side of customs. And every time I looked at somebody, I just smiled. Some people looked away, some people smiled back. But it was interesting because I was just sitting there in line, connecting with people. And I was like, this is nice. I don't care how they respond. But it was nice to just connect with them. It was nice to be in that space and to be able to be like, hey, the line is long and we're here together. And that's okay. You find fulfillment there, wherever it is you find yourself, by not having a preference. Thank you guys so much for joining me. If anybody else wants to come up and pick a number, Jay, thank you. If you're still listening, I appreciate you and your number 7 selection. It really kind of launched something for me, I guess. So I appreciate that. And I'm super grateful for all of you and being here with me. Oh, Cecilia, how are you, my dear?
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, dear. How are you?
Awesome. It's 4:30 in the morning here, so I haven't caught you live in a while, but I'm so glad to.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here with me.
Yeah.
Where are you? So it's 4:30, so you are in your Pacific time, obviously. Where are you
Yeah,
at?
I'm with Lois in Vegas.
You're in Vegas. Are you with Lois? You are with
Yes,
Lois. You
yeah.
just said that.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Oh, how's Lois doing?
She's doing well. Yep.
Been
I
a
think
while
she's
since.
sleeping right now. I have no idea, but
Okay. Well,
for,
send her my best when you do see her.
sure will. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I'll be leaving at the end of the month. I'm going to continue on my adventures, finding fulfillment wherever I am. I love that you're saying
Yes.
that. So
So
beautiful.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and things like this, sitting in an airport and just being like, wow, we're doing this together, no matter what it is. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's nice to just even like when people are like having little like temper tantrums and stuff, it's just nice to just smile and just kind of be like,
hmm
look at you go.
Yeah, like it's
Living your life, feeling your stuff.
That's right. Like all is well. Even
Yeah.
that little temper tantrum, which will
Yeah.
pass too.
Yep. This
Mhm.
this too shall pass.
That's right. Well, I didn't even think about a number, so why don't we go with 16 since it's the 16th?
Wonderful. 16, stillness and integration. One of
Mm,
my faves. Like
love
really,
it
like when
already.
I was writing this one, this one was really kind of powerful for me, and that's because and I think it's really going to connect to preference as well. So
Right.
being empty of mind is of the utmost importance and is to be guarded with fervor. We have all seen states of actions arise, and always beyond it, stillness. Airport temper tantrums, for instance.
Mm, mm,
When any state of action is complete, it naturally returns to stillness. This allows integration of what arose from action, which is the natural cycle of maturation. If stillness and integration cannot be achieved, constant action will lead to anxiety and wild movements. Yielding to stillness makes one impartial, and all particular things fall away. Then, when it is time to die, one can be impartial to that as well.
mm. Wow. Oh, that's so interesting because, yeah, I do have a hard time being still, like physically being still, you
Yeah.
know. That's not true. I enjoy being still, but there's a point where I'm like, all right, I'm being so still that I need to move.
Yeah.
Like it's time. And that's why, I'm like, I'm going back on my adventure, even though it's always been an adventure. It is an adventure every moment, right?
Right.
But I'm like, okay, Vegas is getting really hot. I've spent a few months here. It's not a place that I'm thinking I want to stay and, uh, I don't know, create anything of, and that's not even true either because like creating, I love connecting with people, like you're saying at the airport, smiling at people. That's my thing.
Yeah.
No matter what I'm doing, like I'm going for a walk, I'm saying hello, and you can see and feel sometimes the discomfort of people, like they're so not used to smiling in return,
Yeah.
and
They look
sometimes,
down and you
yeah, oh my
continue
gosh,
smiling. Like
right,
sometimes I continue looking in their direction just a little longer. And really that's not to goat them, but that's just to offer them a little bit more love.
right, and it doesn't stop you from doing it no matter
Right.
what the response is, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I was thinking about the stillness, and so I'm going to Colorado at the end of the month, um, but it's not because you know I don't know I have a heart. It's just that I know that this is an adventure, and why not keep like I don't see a reason for me to go and find a place of my own, like an apartment, and sit there by myself. Like I know that that's what we're told we should do, sit, do this certain thing,
Well,
you know.
stillness is going to look different.
Yeah.
Like being with Lois
Mm-hmm.
is action. It could
Yeah.
be seen as action.
Right.
And your actual moving to Colorado.
Oh, see, that's the thing. I don't also call it moving,
Well,
you
okay. Well,
know.
you're traveling to
Yeah,
California.
yeah,
Could be the stillness,
yes.
right? Because stillness isn't just it. It is. I mean, it also might be a wild movement. Who knows,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I like the action of the stillness of the movement.
Yeah.
Like I love the travel. Like I was looking to take a bus to Colorado. It's like 16 hours. And then I was like, oh, a $34 flight. Well, sorry, no brainer.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I love
And
yes, sitting still
you don't
on
know
the
what's going to
way
happen. You
to,
might have that flight, and it might get delayed for 2 days or whatever, and
right?
you might be forced into stillness in a different way. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
when we look at the Tao, when we look at these texts, we have to remember that it isn't what we think it is.
Yeah,
Words cannot express this, right? And so when
right,
we say, when any action is complete, it naturally returns to stillness. You can't avoid that from happening.
right.
Now, if you fill your life with things like I did with drugs and alcohol and other things like that, I was never able to yield. In the stillness, I created drama.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what created my wild movements and my anxiety.
I understand that very well.
Yeah. And then,
Absolutely.
but yielding to stillness makes one impartial, right? Like that's the line. Yielding to stillness. Stillness is going to happen around you regardless of your being able to recognize it. But when you can
Mm-hmm.
yield to it, whether it's during a physically active moment in your life or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you repeat the last sentence too, please?
The last sentence would go back to yielding to stillness makes one impartial, and all particular things fall away. Then, when it is time to die, one can be impartial to that as well.
Mm, yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
not dying physically necessarily.
Right.
That's dying
Exactly.
to the person that you were before learning what was needed to be learned through the last action you took.
Mm. And there's so much. Every time I'm leaving like the another adventure, I think, like which again, it's all an adventure.
Absolutely.
I think like, what did I learn
Right.
here? You know, what did I learn that now I'm taking into the next uh the next
Iteration of
adventure?
who you are.
Yes, like what am I learning? What am I taking? Who have I
Right.
become because of the that lesson? And I know it's definitely different and way more awesome like every
Right.
time.
And that's what this is
Yeah.
talking about. Then when it's time to die to who you were, you can be impartial
Mm,
to that. So you can let go of some of the preferences that maybe you had as the old person you were. Oh, you used to have a preference for something. Well, one of those preferences might fall away, and that's okay,
yeah, of course it's
right?
okay,
Because
right?
you are now who you're becoming, not who you thought
Hmm.
you'd be, but who you're becoming.
Or who I thought I
Right.
was, which, you're talking about the, addictions and stuff. And, I knew I wasn't going to die from alcohol. I just knew that. And, it seems like that was so long ago.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for that, to not be sitting in that anymore. And yeah, all the lessons and blessings I've learned along the way and will continue
Yeah.
to. Oh, so good. But stillness, yes. I was even just thinking before I hopped up here, like, oh, I woke up at 4, I don't know, it was 4 something, just
Yeah.
naturally, which I tend to do because I go to bed super early, like 9
Yeah, you and me
o'clock.
both.
Um, yeah. So I'm like, oh, should I really be hopping up there? Maybe I need to be still for a minute. And I'm like, well, there's no reason I already found you, so let me come in. But yes, thank
Thank you,
you,
dear.
Martin, John, and welcome back to the States. I'm glad you had a lovely trip. And yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking the Camino is calling.
Oh, it's there. It's waiting.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank
I love
you.
you.
Have a great
Bye bye.
day. Love you too. Bye.
Burp, burp. Okay, we're gonna be bringing Jay back up and see maybe she's got a little something to add. Jay, how you doing? Jay,
What?
how are you doing?
I'm good. How are
I'm good.
you?
We
Who am I
go
talking
through that
to?
every time. What's going on?
Who am I talking to?
Martin, you're on
Martin.
the Dow of the Day.
Oh, how am
I
I
have no
on
idea.
that?
I have no idea. You were in the queue. I'm gonna go ahead and let you go then.
Oh, that's so odd. Thank you. Yeah, please
I'll,
let
I'll I'll
me
drop you down.
go.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. Maybe it was just a butt dial or something. I appreciate you guys staying on and sharing this Dow of the Day with me. Jay, Cecilia, love you guys. Thank you so much. This is Martin John. This is Dow of the Day, where we talk about the Tao Te Ching and some other stuff. So I appreciate you guys for hanging out. Um, if you're interested in the text that I read here, it is the Tao Te Ching. It is my translation or my rendition of the Tao Te Ching, which you can find on my website, which is which is in my profile. I also work with individuals, so if you're interested in doing any work together, as a teacher, I really just point in the right direction. There's nothing for you to learn. You know everything that you need to know, and yeah, I also do Tao readings and other things like that. So if you're interested in connecting with me, please do through my profile or other social media platforms. And as someone who talks about recovery, I talk about the idea of recovering to something, not the idea of recovering from something. I want you to recover yourself. And that's why I will end every talk that I do with this line. Thank you. And until next time, keep recovering yourself.